If you guys are following along in your books, we are on Chapter 6, Section 3. So your learning target for today, I can explain how social Darwinism and laissez-faire economics led to unfair business methods. So we're going to be looking at basically how these companies, how these corporations were able to turn what is supposed to be an economy based on capitalism and based on competition, how they were able to turn this economy into a series of monopolies and basically controlled all of their industries. So, first things first, before we do that, we have to talk about social Darwinism and laissez-faire economics. Basically, when we look at social Darwinism, it's pretty easy. We talked about this before, especially when we were doing Clump. Okay? All this is survival of the fittest. Okay? Survival of the fittest, and only the strong survive. And how this applies to industrialization is that if my company is better than your company, if my company does things better than your company does, then my company should win out, my company should prosper, and your company should ultimately falter and no longer exist anymore. So, by having these principles of survival of the fittest intact, it gave these big business leaders who were borderline corrupt, it gave them a way to basically sleep at night and basically say that I do things better than you, therefore my company is thriving and your company is not. And that goes along with our idea of laissez-faire economics. And laissez-faire economics is just this idea of free enterprise. And that there is no government regulation. Okay, so no government is involved, and that is key. Basically, when you think about it, it's just the idea of letting the people do what they choose. And by doing that, by letting the people do what they choose, that allows, again, this idea of free enterprise to exist, where you have economic ideas such as communism, where all people are equal. That's not the case here. With laissez-faire economics and with social Darwinism, the best companies are supposed to survive. The best people are supposed to survive. And that is a key principle here when we are looking at this idea of industrialization and how these huge companies emerge. And that's just a quick little cartoon. I just love this. Gotta love those guys. They look real fit, ready to go. They do look like gamers, though. There's no doubt about that. So, who are the key players in industrialization? Who are the key people that we're going to be looking at? The first person that we're going to look at is a guy by the name of Andrew Carnegie. And Carnegie was in charge and basically ran the steel industry. The next person that we're going to be looking at is a Cleveland native, a guy by the name of John D. Rockefeller. And Rockefeller was an oil tycoon. And finally, the last guy that we're going to look at, if any of you are familiar with kind of elite universities in the country, a guy by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt University, located in Nashville, is named after him. And Vanderbilt was the big player in the railroad industry. So those are the three key players that we are going to look at. So, let's get to it. Carnegie and the steel game. First things first, Carnegie was a hardworking man. By the time he was 12 years old, as a Scottish immigrant, he was working 12 hours a day. And he basically started at the bottom and worked his way up. It's a pretty inspiring story as far as immigration in this land of opportunity is concerned. And Carnegie, as a businessman, had a pretty simple key to success. And that simple key to success was to make better products cheaper. Okay, so we want to make products, and we want to make them better, but while we make them better, we also want to make them cheaper. And the way that he was able to do that was by a tactic known as vertical integration. And what vertical integration is, it's basically when you buy out all the companies that help you produce your product. So let's say, for example, I own a steakhouse. All right, so we'll call it McCann Steaks. If I were to vertically integrate, what I would also do is I would also have control of, let's say, Connie's Cattle Ranch, where I get all of my meat from. And then I would also buy out, let's say, Pete's Plates, where I would get all of my utensils, my plates, my pepper shakers, my salt shakers, all that stuff. So by buying out Pete's Plates and Connie's Cattles, I no longer have to pay those companies to get those products. And so it makes things a lot cheaper for me. So by vertically integrating, I am saving a ton of money while I also have control of how to make those products better. And by making Connie's Cattles better and by making Pete's Plates better, it will eventually make my steakhouse a lot better. So that is a key, and that's what Carnegie primarily used to get ahead and control the steel industry. Now, the next thing we're going to look at, this is a little more corrupt here. We're going to look at the idea of creating a monopoly. First things first, and really you don't have to write any of this down right here. Why do businesses keep prices low? To attract the customer. Okay, because if you run a business and your product is selling at a price that is a lot higher than the competitors, I'm just going to go to the competitors because I can get essentially the same product at a cheaper price. So in order to make the most money possible, what businesses had to do back then was to eliminate competition. And if we eliminate competition, then people will be forced to buy from us. And how do they do that? How do they eliminate competition? Well, it's a complicated process, and to do that, we have to know three key terms. The first term is a corporation. What a corporation is, and a corporation is something that existed long before industrialization. But a corporation is basically a company that sells stocks. And so these stockholders, quote, control the company. Okay, whatever profits the company makes, the stockholders will get a piece of that profit. The next idea that we're going to look at is this idea of a trust. And basically what a trust is it's like corporations. Okay, so it's similar corporations. They basically team up together. So like corporations team up. And basically this idea of the trust exists because it makes it easier for companies to kind of work together. And then what happens from a trust is that we have a monopoly formed. And basically what a monopoly is when one of the corporations from the trust buys out all of the other companies. And by doing that, going back, by buying out all of the other like companies, what are we doing? We are eliminating competition. And by eliminating competition, by creating a monopoly, we make a ton of money. Because people still have to buy from us. And if we're the only show in town, they will buy from us no matter what prices we have. So, Rockefeller and his dirty ways with the oil company. With horizontal integration. Okay, horizontal integration is, let's say I control, let's say I'm the owner of McDonald's. What I would do in horizontal integration is I would essentially buy out like companies. So companies like Burger King and companies like Wendy's, I would buy out, and then I would turn them into McDonald's. And by doing that, people would only eat at McDonald's. And if they wanted fast food, McDonald's was the only place they had. They were going to eat there no matter what. And I was going to reap all of that profit. So after this, the end result is there is no competition, and profits are maximized. So the result from Carnegie was when he first started his oil company, which is a company known as Standard Oil, he controlled about 3% of the oil in the U.S. In the 1890s, however, because of these tactics, such as trusts, and unifying these trusts and then eventually buying out these other corporations, Rockefeller was able to control 90% of oil in the U.S. And with how crucial oil was, Rockefeller became one of the richest men in the entire country. And the last person we're going to look at is a gentleman by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is right there. Okay? Very similar. In the railroad industry, Vanderbilt simply tried to buy out all of his competitors. Okay, and by buying out competition, again, we increase profits. And the reason that we are able to control the railroad now is because we own all of it. And by we, I mean Vanderbilt. So by controlling the railroad, why this was so crucial was because with industrialization, with products being made at such a fast rate, and these products need to get shipped out, by controlling the railroad industry, we control basically all major forms of transportation during this time period. So it is crucial. Now the government tries to step in. The government tries to implement something known as the Sherman Antitrust Act. Now the Sherman Antitrust Act, what it was, is it was simply a way for the government to regulate these trusts and to basically try to eliminate these trusts because they realized that by these trusts that were being created, they were creating monopolies. And since they were creating monopolies, they were doing two things. A, they were making prices higher for the consumer. Okay. And the second thing that they were doing is they were putting people out of business. And so this begs the question to be asked is if we're putting people out of business by these, quote, monopolies and these trusts, does that really go back to the idea of laissez-faire economics and free enterprise? Does the government need to step in if these monopolies are being created? Now, some people in the government said that they did. But the level of success that the Sherman Antitrust Act had was essentially none. And the reason for that is because A, it was easy for companies to get around because of the language it was written in. And then second thing was that a lot of people in the government did not support it because they felt that the government should stay out. And so by not getting that support and by the government staying out, what happened is that these companies were still able to form these huge trusts. Why? Because of laissez-faire economics and having the government stay out, and because of this idea